Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Black Hills AI webinar, Highest Exposure, Highest Stakes, AI's Impact on Work, including a look at leveraging AI and model context protocol to automate complex patent workflows. Before we get started, here are just a few reminders. A recording of this episode and the slides will be made available on the Black Hills AI YouTube channel, as well as the Black Hills AI website. Feel free to enter any questions using the Q&A feature in the Zoom menu. We invite you to follow us on LinkedIn and to visit our website to learn about our other webinars. And with that, I will pass things over to Tom.
All right, thanks, Erica. Hi, everybody. Tom Marlow here, Chief AI Officer with Black Hills AI. And I'm joined today again by Dr. Manjeet Rege, Director of the Center for Applied Artificial Intelligence at the University of St. Thomas, one of our advisors. And if you've tuned in previously, you know there's some very interesting and engaging content that he likes to share with us. So, Manjeet, glad to have you here again today. And I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Um, I'll be, starting off with this particular job report that I co-authored with my co-author Adam Rosenthal, from the research director at North Star Policy Action. So what we did was we paired an academic lens on what generative AI can actually do with a policy research lens on how that plays out for working people. For those of you evaluating or already deploying AI inside your own organizations, that combination matters quite a lot. This is independent research, built on federal labor data and peer-reviewed approaches, and it happens to land squarely on the questions many leadership teams are already asking today. To understand why this matters for your organization right now, consider that AI you are evaluating today is fundamentally different from the chatbot most of us tried a few years ago. We have moved past simple chat tools into agentic AI systems that can act, not just answer. Um, and this 35% win rate that we have mentioned here on on expert level professional benchmarks, the latest models are now outperforming human industry experts more than a third of the time. For firms in legal, finance, or professional services, that is not an abstract statistic. It means the tools your competitors are piloting right now are already capable of professional grade work. And the number, I would ask you to hold onto is the 7-month half-life. Task complexity these systems can handle is roughly doubling twice a year. So whatever you saw in a maybe like a demo 6 months ago, assume it has already moved since then. The organizations that treat this as a one-time evaluation will fall behind the ones that treat it as a capability that has to be managed on a regular basis. The technology is moving fast, but the adoption inside organizations is moving even faster. We are past the point where AI is an experiment on the side. 80% of the enterprises have already moved it into core operations. And that shift shows up clearly in hiring data in sectors with high exposure, including software development. We are seeing a 13% decline in entry level hiring. And think of that as a warning sign, in a way. Companies are not necessarily replacing their senior experts yet, but they are using AI to absorb the work that used to train junior staff. So if your organization is not deliberately planning for how the next generation of talent gets trained, you will feel that gap in 2 or 3 years. Right when you need experienced people, you have not developed up until that point. This slide captures something important about how fast the ground is shifting under us. Back in 2020, before Gen AI existed as we know it, a widely used approach, estimated that about 17% of the workforce was at meaningful risk of automation. That was, what I call the old map. Using an updated approach built specifically around Gen AI capabilities, that number for Minnesota alone jumps to around 33%. So nearly double in about 5 years. And, I want to be precise about what that means. It does not mean the earlier estimate was wrong. It means the technology moved faster and the approach built to measure it, right? So if you are benchmarking your own AI strategy against an assessment your organization did even a year or two ago, there is a very real chance that assessment is already out of date. So the gap between what leadership believes AI can do and what AI can actually do right now, that is the decoupling. And it is the single biggest risk we see in how organizations plan for this. So as AI continues to move into the workplace, we are seeing a real rise in anxiety among workers, and this is worth kind of sitting with for a moment, because it almost certainly describes people on your own team. When people are asked what worries them most about AI, the workplace tops the list. People are most concerned that AI is going to affect their own job, and this is not a partisan issue. Roughly equal numbers across the political spectrum say that they are more worried than excited about AI. So if you are rolling out AI tools internally, assume that a meaningful share of your workforce is anxious about it right now, regardless of their politics, regardless of their role. When we look at workers, um, when we look at what workers are, concerned about, job loss is certainly part of it, but there are other pieces that matter just as much for how you introduce these tools. Beyond displacement, workers are particularly uneasy about AI making final decisions about them. Many of you have probably experienced or heard about, AI-driven interviews and hiring processes firsthand. So people are genuinely uncomfortable with AI making final calls on hiring, firing, or even promotion. Alongside that, there is a high level of concern about AI driven monitoring, meaning AI being used to track employees' work. For any organization introducing these tools, those two areas, decision making and monitoring, are exactly where trust gets built or lost fastest. One more thing this data tells us: the public is increasingly calling for government to step in on this, and there has not been much movement at the federal level, which means most of this is falling to the states and unevenly at that as well. So, what this slide shows is an overwhelmingly majority of people saying they want to see regulation, even if it means slower AI innovation. Now, I do not think those two things have to be in conflict. Good governance does not have to slow innovation down, but at least this tells you something practical. Your employees, your clients are not waiting for a clear external rule book before they form an opinion about how AI should be used responsibly. If you do not have your own internal governance, people will judge you against a standard that does not exist yet in terms of law, but very much exists in their expectation. Now, we can contrast that high level of public anxiety with a fairly stagnant legislative picture, at least here in Minnesota. Uh, the state has passed some AI regulated legislation, mostly around consumer privacy and misinformation, but nothing specific to how AI affects workers. And this is genuinely, again, as I said, not a partisan pattern. Texas, a far more conservative state, has actually passed more AI legislation focused specifically on workers than Minnesota has. The practical takeaway for anyone is simple. You cannot count on a consistent regulatory floor to tell you what responsible AI looks like. Different states are moving at different speeds and in different directions, which means the organizations that build their own clear internal standards now are the ones that will not be caught, flat-footed later. So no matter which way the legislation eventually goes. Before we get into the numbers that we found from our research, it is worth being precise about our yardstick, because this is where a lot of public conversation kind of goes wrong. It is a common mistake to hear 33% exposure and assume that means 33% job loss or projected job loss. That is not what this measures. Exposure means that a meaningful share of a job's tasks can now be performed by generative AI at a quality comparable to a human. That shows up in three ways. First, augmentation, where you get a genuine co-pilot that makes existing work more productive, right? And we all have kind of experienced that. Second is transformation, where the role itself kind of evolves. So the classic example is maybe you're a writer who becomes an editor of AI generated drafts. Third is displacement, and displacement is only a subset of exposure, not the default outcome. And this distinction, matters for any organization thinking through its own AI adoption. Exposure is an opportunity to redesign work. It only becomes a threat when organizations fail to plan for it. So how did we, actually arrive at these numbers that you will see? We combined three data sources to build a picture specific to Minnesota. Our report is specific to Minnesota. So first, we used gold standard global benchmarks from researchers at Oxford and Wharton School, who mapped generative AI capabilities against more than 19,000 distinct work tasks. Second, we cross-referenced that against the federal, ONET database, which defines the granular day-to-day duties of over 900 occupations. Third, and most important for our purposes, we localized all of it using Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development payroll data, which accounts for our state's particular concentration of management and headquarters roles. I mentioned the rigor of this approach because it matters, well beyond this particular report. Whenever you're evaluating any claim about um, what their AI can or cannot do for your organization, the same question applies. Is that claim backed by real occupation task data or by a demo and maybe a slide? So now, what did we actually find? When we say a job has high generative AI exposure, we mean 50% or more of that job's tasks could be performed by AI. That describes roughly 800 and 12,000 Minnesota workers, close to a third of the entire state workforce. When we say a very high exposure, we mean 75% or more of the tasks, and that is about 110,000 workers. Now, one important caveat here, this study only measures exposure to generative AI specifically, not other forms of automation or algorithmic management. So if anything, this likely, I would say, underestimates the full picture. For any leadership team, the practical question is not whether a third of your workforce could, in theory, be affected. It is whether you have a plan for what happens to that uh, third of the people. Now, because roughly a third of Minnesota workers' workforce kind of sits in these highly exposed jobs, our state carries a level of exposure that most of our regional neighbors do not. Minnesota ranks 10th most exposed in the entire nation and most exposed state in the Midwest. Now, compare that to a state like, let's say, North Dakota, where only about a quarter of the workers fall into the highly exposed category. Um, Now, if a company, primarily operates in Minnesota, or if a meaningful share of your employees' work, that regional gap matters. You're not, managing the shift on the same timeline as maybe your competitor based in a less exposed state. The urgency here is specific to where you are based out of. Now, part of why Minnesota carries this exposure has to do with the specific mix of jobs concentrated here. Roles like customer service representatives, software developers, and market research analysts are simply more plentiful in Minnesota's economy than in our neighboring states, and those happen to be exactly the roles with the highest Gen AI exposure. And that is the underlying driver of Minnesota's vulnerability. Not that Minnesota workers are somehow more replaceable, but what our economy is structurally weighted toward, uh, the kind of roles this technology touches first. If we break this down further by who is affected, one clear finding stands out. Female workers in Minnesota are more likely than male workers to be in highly exposed jobs. And that has, real implications for how organizations think about equity in their own AI rollout. Since the roles most likely to be affected are not evenly distributed across your workforce. If we look at the same data through the lens of a union density, a pattern emerges. In the upper left of this chart are industries where relatively low union representation and relatively high Gen AI exposure, right? Sectors like finance, information technology, real estate, right? These have been traditionally the domains that were always kind of very much in demand in terms of employment, but low union representation, but also a higher Gen AI exposure in the current times. In the lower right are industries where you can see higher union density and lower exposure. So education being the clearest example there. So what this suggests is a mismatch. The workers most affected by AI are often the ones with the least structured mechanism for having a say in how it gets implemented. Um, Now, most of the organizations are not, union environments, and that is fine. The underlying point does not depend on unionization. What it tells us is that if you do not build some structured channel for employee feedback into your AI rollout, whatever that channel looks like for your organization, you are rolling this out into exactly the kind of environment where resistance and quiet workaround use tend to show up. Um, this slide, gets specific about which roles top the list. So interpreters and translators show the highest exposure that we measured, at least 80%, because so much of that work that is translating, proofreading, adapting, um, maps directly onto what Gen AI already does very well. Legal professionals show a high exposure too, driven by contract analysis, legal research, and document drafting. Um, Financial analysts show a high exposure through data synthesis, report generation, and forecasting. And marketing managers, show high exposure through content creation, market research, and campaign planning. So I want to draw your attention to, something specific here. Two of those four categories, that is legal and financial roles, are exactly that many of you probably on this call are already working in, at least in the legal domain. So this is not an abstract labor market trend happening somewhere else. It is happening in the exact professions that many of you might be active in. Minnesota's risk is concentrated in a specific set of sectors, and it is again worth naming them plainly. Professional and technical services carry the highest exposure, built on the management, legal, and engineering roles that Gen AI is especially good at augmenting. Finance and insurance are seeing rapid change in how underwriting, risk assessment, and claims processing get done. IT is a particularly interesting case. Even as AI creates new tools for the industry, it is already suppressing entry level hiring with that 13% decline in jobs for early career developers we mentioned earlier. And retail and customer service are seeing heavy adoption of AI assistants for frontline support. So, put together, Minnesota, as I said, ranks 10th most exposed nationally and highest in Midwest. Our economy is weighted towards exactly the professions, legal, finance, and professional services that Gen AI is built to touch first. We've also built a dashboard that goes along with the report, the job report that we released. And maybe I can quickly show you this particular dashboard that we have built. Um, so when you arrive at this dashboard, you can look at this in two ways. If you're if you want to just look at the AI exposure, here at the top, we have this slider that allows you to specify the risk exposure and the number of people that happen to fall in that risk exposure, right? So that risk exposure, as I said, is a percentage. So if I say let's say 30 to 70%, which means 30 to 70% of your job tasks can be automated by AI. So if I bring this down to zero here, I can exactly see that this is um, 0 to 10%, are about 7.73% in Minnesota. So about 7.73% of employees in Minnesota are in that less than 10% of exposure. Um, right. So this is, I've set the threshold at 50 to 100%. Now, this is only for Minnesota. I can now, compare with the current set threshold with any other state as well. Now, what we also have here is um, I can select a particular profession. So here, let me unselect, and then there is legal over here. So when I select legal, and this is only for um, Minnesota, so this is the average AI exposure for the selected profession. And then here within that particular selected profession, we are showing the um, risk exposure for a different kind of jobs within that legal uh, profession. And again, I just want to emphasize that when you see a number like 0.56 or 0.43, that does not mean that 43% of the lawyers will get replaced by Gen AI. It only means that when you look at the number of tasks that a lawyer might do, 43% of those tasks can now be automated by Gen AI. And remember what I said earlier about part of your job getting automated, transformed, or maybe displaced. So what does this actually mean for um, how you move forward. The research is clear that when employees have a genuine voice in how AI gets introduced, adoption, succeeds. People report that it removes the routine, mundane parts of their job and makes the work more meaningful. Um, Leave them out of that process, and you tend to get resistance and often uh, quiet use of unapproved tools instead. Now, there are three questions every organization adopting AI needs to answer clearly. First is digital surveillance. Are you being transparent with your employees about what is being monitored and why? Second is decision making. Is there a clear line around which decisions AI is allowed to influence and which ones, hiring, promotion, performance still require a human being? Third is displacement. Do you have an actual plan to retrain and redeploy people whose roles change rather than, simply perhaps eliminating them? The organizations that get ahead of these three questions are going to be the ones that succeed with adoption, and the ones that do not, tend to run into a kind of avoidable resistance later. So translating this into an actual plan, um, I would point to three priorities. First, worker retraining. Just as the um, state could fund reskilling grants for highly exposed sectors like legal, finance, and office support, your organization can build the same thing internally as well. Structured, retraining specifically targeted at roles are most perhaps exposed. That is a way to show support to your employees. Second is AI literacy at every level. Now, this kind of goes um, beyond your own organization, and this is really about the equivalent of building AI education into a curriculum from day one is making sure every employee, not just your most technical staff, has a working understanding of what these tools can and cannot. Third is a worker voice. Just as collective bargaining gives organized workers a seat at the table, your organization needs some equivalent structure, like a feedback channel, a working group, whatever fits your culture, so that AI implementation is not a decision made behind closed doors and just kind of handed down. So across all three, the goal is the same. These tools should be used to augment your employees and not to replace them. Now, looking, further ahead, it is worth understanding where this technology is headed next. We are moving from chatbots, tools that you simply ask a question, to agents, systems that can autonomously execute complex, multi-step workflows. And that changes the workforce equation. Roles, shift away from direct task execution towards strategic oversight, and what we would call system governance. The future job is not just doing the task, it is managing an AI agent or AI agents that perform the task. And that does require human judgment, oversight, and ethical grounding. That remains the real competitive advantage for the human professional. And that is actually a perfect place for me to hand things over, uh, because um, nowhere is this shift to teammates more concrete than in intellectual property and legal work, which is exactly where Tom Marlow is going to take us next. Over to you, Tom.
Sounds good. Thanks, Manjeet. Totally agree. And then great information. I particularly like the action plan there. Change management tends to be a huge part of making an initiative with AI successful, at least from what we've seen for sure in the legal and IP field. Okay, so we just saw legal professionals ranked among the most exposed occupations in the study that Dr. Rege was just showing us: contract analysis, legal research, document drafting, all high on that list. I want to spend the next few minutes here telling you what that exposure can look like from the inside, because we live exactly at that frontier. Black Hills has spent 15 years automating IP workflows in patent practice. I think I'm comfortable saying is about as exposed as legal work gets. It's document heavy, it's deadline driven, it's rule bound, and that's precisely the kind of work that AI does well, right? A lot of exposure there. Um, Here's the thing, and the takeaway kind of for this whole section, at least from my perspective, I continue to be very skeptical that AI replaces IP professionals. I'm much more on the optimistic side. What we observe over and over is that it replaces what you might call the worst parts of the day. Um, so the real question for this profession isn't headcount. I think it's where do the hours go? So next slide, I'll show you what I mean. So here's the deal with legal work. Historically, about 80%, I'm using this number because it's nice and it's round, of an attorney's time goes to work like collecting, assembling, reviewing information, in our field, pulling file histories, reviewing documents, gathering facts, and only about, we'll say, 20% goes to the outcomes that, clients really want to pay for: strategic analysis, judgment, that type of thing. Um, our goal, and I'd argue the goal of any serious legal AI effort, is to invert that. We want to shoot for 80% strategy, 20% collection, as far as like the actual working time goes. And this isn't necessarily incremental. So let's take an example, drafting a response. This is a task that typically takes, we'll say, 8 to 10 hours, maybe less, maybe more, depending on the case and your level of skill. This drops drastically with an automated workflow. Now, when you have a task time collapse like that, you have two choices as a firm. You can do the same work with fewer people, of course, or you can do more and better, I would say, work with the people you have. Everything we see in the market says firms wind up on that second path because at the end of the day, there's not really a shortage of legal work. There's a shortage of capacity. And this is really about capacity building and not headcount reduction. So on the next slide, let me let me make this concrete um, with the workflows that we automate every day. So take correspondence processing. Every piece of USPTO communication gets read, classified, and routed automatically. Docketing takes dates, extracts deadlines, and importantly, cross-checks and verifies everything. IDS support, here we're assembling references, building the disclosure record, and then with office actions and with notice of allowance review, um, steps like flagging formalities, which can be very time consuming in the file history in the case, um, analyzing rejections, suggesting arguments, suggesting amendments, and so on. Putting these into an automated workflow early lets the attorney start from an organized analysis instead of a stack of flat PDFs. So the pattern across all four of these particular examples here, in every case, is that what AI has removed was the rekeying, the clicking, the gathering, this work that exists, let's say around the professional, and not necessarily the professional themselves. So the judgment calls still land on a person's desk. They just land there faster and cleaner. So how does this actually work under the hood? Here's an example of the plumbing, we'll call it, behind all this. I'm going to talk specifically about the auto model context protocol, our MCP, that we have with Black Hills. But this can kind of be extrapolated out generically. This is basically an MCP, an easy to use protocol that lets an assistant, like a Claude, like a ChatGPT Copilot, something you're comfortable with maybe already, securely plug into your actual data. So this could be live USPTO file histories, IP management system data, document stores, depending on what you have set up. And this takes the place of relying only on, say, what somebody might paste into a chat window or drop in from their desktop. We at Black Hills built our AutoHub into our MCP server. So one protocol connects the assistant and the agents with inside these tools to all these data sources, as well as custom built tools that the agents within there can use as well. This might be provisional draft generators, examiner analytics that you might want to use during prosecution, and so on. Of course, all this gets wrapped together with strict authentication, access controls, all that good stuff. We can't forget that. And this is what unlocks complex workflows rather than the kind of simple one-off uh, chat-based answers. Um, by being able to use an MCP with the agents in these tools, you get multiple steps executing in succession in order to get you some results. So a single request, like pull application number, whatever, review the office action, draft a response shell. This becomes a chain that the assistant executes kind of end to end. Loads matter, pulls the claims, analyzes rejections, draft the shell, verifies docket entries if you need to. It can even review related cases for style or argument consistency. This that I have on here is a real application number, by the way. We run this exact workflow live in one of our previous auto webinars. So if you want to watch and see how that works kind of in action, go check out our recordings on those sessions. Reach out if you want a link for that, or I think you can find it on our webpage or on YouTube. So if you recall Dr. Rege's agentic frontier that he mentioned, systems that take action, this is that. So this raises the obvious question, where exactly does the human's job start? Like what's the line? In our experience, that line separating the human work and the AI work has been relatively stable, and it looks kind of like this. On the left, things that an AI does well and should be doing, talking about initial research and summarization, initial drafts, uh, chronologies, file history summaries, claim review, clean claim creation, document analysis, that type of thing. And on the right, we've got the things that stay human, legal conclusions, strategic client counseling, representation and advocacy, and most importantly, that signature that you put on the bottom line of any document that you might submit. All the exposure that Dr. Rege showed just earlier lives over in this nice left column. Um, and, no question, the disruption here, it's real, it's happening, and it's growing on this column. Um, but I think the beauty here is that in the right column, I think the way I'd put it is this is where the profession really lives. This is why clients hire lawyers in the first place. So AI eats further into that left column, and the line between these two doesn't really move that much. And you know, I don't. This isn't just a cultural preference. I would say there's real structure here. So, and that structure comes from, if we take a look at the next slide, here's, I think, a very strong argument against that replacement narrative and why that line stays in its place and its professional responsibility. So, under the ABA Model Rule 5.3, AI is treated like a non-lawyer assistant. So that means the attorney remains professionally and ethically responsible for every output. You can't delegate accountability to a model. If you if you want to know what happens when somebody forgets that, look up the Mata v. Avianca case. You may recognize this as the one involving a court-filed brief full of hallucinated citations that wound up with sanctions for the attorneys involved. This case probably did more for AI verification and human in the loop protocols than any policy memo ever written. Here's the flip side, though. And this is the part that firm leadership I've seen in some cases get wrong. And I have to mention because it's important. Just banning AI so that you don't have to worry about these potential hallucinations or issues, it backfires too. When firms prohibit these tools, usage usually doesn't stop. Associates use personal accounts on personal devices, and now your client's confidential information is sitting on, we'll say, less than secure consumer platforms, platforms that allow model retraining based on prompt content. Not a good thing. It's a Rule 1.6 problem, and I would argue it is worse than the problem you were trying to prevent in the first place. So, not to digress too far off the topic, the answer is, I think, neither blind adoption nor prohibition. It's a kind of concerted, governed adoption with secure firm-controlled connections like the MCP setup that I just showed, having clear policies, human-in-the-loop verification of everything before it goes out the door, and you're on the right track. Okay, so let me kind of close up my piece here on an optimistic note because I think for me, this is the honest one. Remember Manjeet's framing from earlier of the writer becoming the editor. Let's try to apply that in IP practice. We really watch this same shift happen, and in specific roles, we see paralegals moving from day-to-day daily data entry work to quality governance. So instead of typing deadlines into a docket, they're overseeing and verifying the automated systems, which frankly is a more skilled and frankly also more valuable job. We see associates move from document assembly to work like that encompasses more strategy and more client counseling. And this is the work that they went to law school hoping to do anyway. So, very positive movements across the board. Everyone shifts from task execution to strategic oversight. So, here's where I'll land, and then I'll hand things back for questions. The exposure Manjeet has showed is real. I see it every day. We work with it at Black Hills every day. And anyone who tells you that legal work won't change is selling you something. Um, but the opportunity is bigger. The professionals stay. I'd say the drudgery decreases, and the work that's left is the work that people actually wanted to do in the first place. Um, Now you can do more of it. All right. So thank you, everybody. With that, I want to open things up for questions, if you have any, and we can take it from there. All right. Okay. So I see one question. Um, who should I set up? Who should I set up or train on AI tools at my firm? Partner, attorneys, associates, paralegals, dot, dot, dot. I think my answer here is yes. Anybody who is interested in using the tools, which could be everybody at the firm, is worth setting up. Um, I've read about some firms even putting in place initiatives to allow up to, I think I've seen as much as 20% of like early associate time billing, billing credit time to be allowed to be spent on learning and working with AI tools. The goal is these things are here to stay. They're going to be a part of our daily and professional lives. And so the more you have folks figuring out how to use approved tools, um, the better. All right, I see another question. Do you have published documentation for the AutoHub MCP and examples of how to take advantage of it? Yes, absolutely. And the best place there would be to reach out to sales at blackhills.ai, and they will be happy to share and show that information with you on how it works. Another question. Do you see any differences in implementation and use between in-house corporate teams versus law firm teams? Do you think corporate entities will use AI to bring in more work and give less to law firms? Yeah, this is a great question. And I'll do my best to answer this because I used to be in-house as well. From that perspective, we've seen implementation across the board, in-house teams and law firm teams. I think potentially corporates will use AI to bring some more of that work internally, but it's going to be again, it's work in that left-hand column, if you recall that slide. It's work that they might pawn off to a law firm. That at the law firm, it's more the busy work. Maybe it rises to the level of some initial provisional drafting, but past that, I think the things that an in-house group, if they're using outside counsel anyway, the things that they want to use the outside counsel for is are the knowledge and the experience and the advisory of the attorneys that they're working with over that we'll call it that 80% kind of AI driven work that the tools are good at. So yes, I think it will shift things a little bit, but I don't think it'll be shifted in a way that's detrimental to the way that law firms operate. Um, the the exception might be if an in-house decides to kind of stand up a more full-serviced IP operation internally, leveraging the tools, then that changed the math a little bit as well. All right, we'll give it another minute or so just to see if there's any other questions out there. All right, nice. Well, we're closing on the hour. So, Dr. Rege, again, thanks again for joining us. I always enjoy your presentations. And for everybody here and everybody that's listening to the recording, thanks for tuning in. As always, if you have any follow-up questions, any thoughts that come out of listening to these that you want to discuss with us, feel free to reach out and send us an email or give us a call. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a
Thank you
good
so
one.
much, Tom. Thank you, everyone.